Okay, so here's my solution to that last got it. Start off with what we're given, which is, well, we're trying to figure out angle S, if it's congruent to WVS. So this angle. So I'm looking at that little triangle. So I'm going to use the fact that they told me those two sides were congruent. VW is congruent to, or line segment VW is congruent to line segment WS. That is given. Highlight those really quick. It's given that these two lines, that's what those hash marks mean. Next thing, I know that triangle VWS is isosceles because the legs are congruent. So now I know I've established that the triangle I'm talking about is isosceles, so then I can use the isosceles triangle theorem to say that the base angles WVS and S are congruent. So that's my first part. I've highlighted in green and I've highlighted the question in green. The second part of the question is TR congruent to TS? So now we're talking about these guys, TR and TS. Are those two legs congruent? Well, I've already established that S is congruent to VWS. That was the last thing I said. I also know that R is congruent to V. So, oh, I should not have wrote angle V there. I'm going to fix that because angle V is not specific enough in this situation. I need to write WVS because angle V could be any of the three angles that are at that point. WVS. All right. And so then by the so if WVS is congruent to S and WVS is congruent to R, then R is congruent to S by the transitive property of congruence. We can put one little arc here to show it's congruent to those other two angles. Therefore, we know that the base angles of triangle RTS are congruent, therefore it is isosceles. And if it's isosceles, then those sides we have highlighted, line segment TR and line segment TS, must be congruent by the converse of the isosceles triangle theorem. That's how I did it. It's not the only way to do it. I think it's probably the shortest way to do it, but I could be wrong. Anyway, I got there, so it's good enough for me. The next thing we're looking at is theorem 4.5, which says if a line bisects the angle, so if you cut this angle in half, then it's going to come straight down. It's going to make right angles down here, and these two line segments that are created will be congruent. So that's what you have marked in this diagram over here on the right. If you cut an isosceles triangle in half, if you bisect that top angle, right? So you have two congruent angles up there. You have a perpendicular, a line. You now have a line perpendicular to the base, which means it's also the height of this triangle. And you also have AD is congruent to DB. So, bunch of stuff with that to know. Make sure you maybe pause the video, take notes on it. Let's look at what we can do with that. So here's a simple example. This is an isosceles triangle. What is the value of x? Well, if it's marked as isosceles because the legs here are marked as congruent, so I can say the base angles are congruent, which means that this is also 54. Then I can say, okay, 54 plus 54 the big triangle has to add up to 180. So 54 plus the whole top angle, which is actually 2x because you have two congruent things. So it's like x on one side and x on the other side. That has to add up to 180 because triangles always add up to 180. So then we can just do a little bit of algebra to say That's 108 plus 2x equals 180. Get that x by itself, so we'll get rid of the 108. 2x equals 72. Make that better. And divide that by 2, and we get x equals 36. So there's a little example of how we can do some algebra with isosceles triangles. The next thing is suppose the measure of angle A is 27. So now your A is 27. Oh, I just realized I made a mistake. I marked these angles with one arc, but the diagram already had one arc. So if I'm going to mark those two angles as congruent, I need to use two arcs. Otherwise, I'm saying that all of those angles are congruent to each other, which is not the case. Okay, so try this one out. You're given now that A is 27. So like that, and see if you can figure out what X is. Good luck on that, and I'll see you in the next video.